Do you think that what we are, like as spiritual or numinous beings, what we are, that which we are, that's in, like, say, the image of God, the way that that thing manifests physically is by, like, internal symmetry transformations, so that when we go and interact with something else, the interference produces the consequences of the willful transformation of the internal phases. Like,
Something
do you
like
think
that.
that,
Yeah.
you think that's what we are?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, you're making so the claim you're making is very natural for a physicist, and I made the claim for a very long time. Okay, and it's a very important claim, and it's an insanely difficult thing to deal with adequately, which is why this project that I'm working on has taken me uh like 6 or 7 years just to get to the point where I'm confident that I'm moving in the right direction to mathematically frame what I'm trying to talk about to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even in the realm yet where I can make a concrete proposition about the particular mathematical equations we need to use. It just
Yeah.
has taken so long to get to this point because of this exact thing. And the idea here is that if I can frame everything, if
So wait,
everything,
but before you start, just say like you are making a critique on the claims that would be made by Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, or Brett
so I'm not
Weinstein
that that
that well no
so
what you're framing something like your pushback
yeah, yeah, that's
or
right.
your issue with arguments constructed saying that the totality of being can be encoded in physical matter like at the level of atoms or something like that. And so this is like something that you're viscerally against, and you're kind of
Yes,
setting up an argument as to why you're
yes,
against it.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. No, so I use the personalities that you've listed there as a tool because I have listened to some of them enough. I mean, not just them. I've listened to many descendants that I just regard those particular individuals as something like the generators of this particular type of psychology. I mean, I
Oh
think
yeah,
probably
I feel
Tim
you.
Harris fits into that group as well. I mean,
Yep, yep. They were called the Four Horsemen for a while. Dennett, it was a
yeah,
Dan
right,
Dennett,
right,
Richard
exactly,
Dawkins,
exactly right,
Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris. Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly right, yeah. So, and they, in if I had to guess, I would guess that they are descendants of um the domination of the atheistic uh, intuition and influence that specifically manifested in the physics community about 100 years ago.
Yes, and I think if you read C.S. Lewis' treatise on miracles, he actually is even back then making art. So this has probably been like the 1920s or something like that. He's actually making arguments about purely materialistic worldviews and how they fail in a lot of ways. So it's actually pretty
Yeah.
interesting. But
So
yeah.
so the okay. So in mathematics, when you're trying to show that a particular system of reasoning is incomplete, what you need to do is something called diagonalization.
Hmm.
And that comes from Cantor's diagonal method, where he shows that the real numbers can't possibly be countable by giving them binary representation and then showing how to construct an element that can't possibly live within the set of constructions that you've just built.
Yeah.
Um, and diagonalization is exactly how Gödel proved his famous incompleteness theorems, is because
Okay.
basically what he did is he showed that if we take Hilbert's perspective seriously, and Hilbert's perspective is we can essentially algorithmically generate all possible logical propositions about number theory
Hmm.
using a finite set of symbols and a
Hmm.
finite set of axioms.
Hmm.
If you label the symbols by numbers and you label them in uniquely, then essentially what you can do is you can show that every single logical proposition is in one-to-one correspondence with a prime number, or sorry, a prime factorization.
Okay.
And so the prime factorization will be a unique representation of a particular logical predicate. Then all you need to do is build the specific number that basically says something like, I am not provable. But if you build the thing that says I am not provable, then you built it. And when you build it, you construct a proof for it. So
Mm.
either the system is inconsistent, or in other words, you can build something that shouldn't be. Either the whole system is uh, contingent upon a falsity, or the system is inconsistent.
So
Right.
this it's a paradox.
Correct. Now you can show that if you want to give models of the system, those things which are those claims which are um, paradoxical in that way can be taken to be either true or false, and then you can sort of resolve problems that way. But that's not the important piece here. The important piece here is that the way that you diagonalize the particular intuition that you're having, or that we're having, about trying to expand everything in terms of physical data, is that the individual who is performing the construction is there and coextensive with those ideas. Like,
Hmm.
he is the thing that is giving rise to those ideas.
Yeah.
And as soon as you realize that you are the thing that's giving rise to those ideas, you also understand that you cannot see behind that thing
Mm.
because you can't see behind yourself.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Like,
Yes. Yes.
that is the limiting factor, right? And so if it is true that you are inherently limited in a particular way, it's also impossible for you to know the nature of that limitation, which means that the only thing that you can do is you can make conjectures about the nature of reality, build things, and then observe the degree to which they conform.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, if you widen your scope of observation from things that are beyond merely physical, like you start asking questions like, what is the nature of the immediate psychological data which presents itself before me? Because that's the thing I'm trying to study.
Hmm.
It's not how it gets encoded in physical reality. It's this thing right here.
Yeah.
Then you have to start being very careful about these things, because as soon as you make that claim that it's reducible to physical things, then you fall into the trap of, well, let me just write down all the equations of motion and then show how, like,
Yes.
they're
Yes. Yes.
dynamical things. But the problem is that you've already made the assumption that the thing that you can use to analyze those things is a valid thing, which is you,
Yeah.
right?
So
And so
this. Yeah.
so you're limited by that thing. Like, you can't get around it or behind it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And if that's
Yes.
the thing you're trying to study,
Yes. 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 Yes.
you're
Yes.
trying to understand the degree to which that thing has objective nature.
Yes.
Because
Yes. Yes.
I don't think that it has. Because if I take the position that it's totally subjective, then there's no way that we could ever ascertain objective data whatsoever, because that's the thing we use to conceptualize and know reality, right? Because we literally would be incapable of building systems of thought at all if it was purely subjective, because there
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
never be
Yeah.
any
Yeah. Yeah.
capacity for shared experience. It'd be pure
Yes.
chaos,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. This is my main
Right. And
argument I
so,
make all the time. Yeah.
and so as a consequence, the fact that physics is real and exists and works as well as it does is proof that the thing that I'm trying to point to has structure. It doesn't mean that it's pure structure. I don't think that it is,
Hmm.
right? But I do think that it has structure. And as soon as you say, well, I'm going to conjecture that it has structure, the question becomes, great, now how do we study it, right?
Yeah.
Which is exactly why it's taken so damn long for me to even get to the point where I can start to set these things up. Is because, like, it took me forever to figure out which mathematical tools I was allowed to use, because I tried very hard not to introduce things into the system that don't have a first order interpretation in the sense that I'm meaning here. Like, I need to be able to show how a particular, say, mathematical object is in one-to-one correspondence with a particular psychological process that I regard as being first order or immediate in this sense that I'm speaking about right here. So
Mm.
as soon as I introduce something, I have to be able to indicate the way in which it encodes the information of this immediate experience.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because a lot of where I've become spiritually began talking to my friend Howard Blair. He's a retired computer science professor, and he is a contemplative. So he used to be a Zen Buddhist, and he does a
Mhm.
lot of meditative work and things like that. And the first interactions I had, he was always obsessed with structure, trying to see beyond the structure, trying to get rid of the structure.
Mhm.
And I think that this formulated the foundations of a lot of my understanding of Buddhism. Yeah, it's the idea of a filter, and the idea of trying to have experience that removes the filter. So it's almost like there's some data there, and then there's something like you or something like that, and then there's like a filter that takes in the data and then like spits out an experience. But you're always, and this is the idea, that you're always experiencing a thought. You're not actually having a direct experience, but you're experiencing a thought. And it's something like the fact that you can construct something like a mental model, a mental object. The
Mhm.
fact that you can construct that means that you are taking something like that affective essence data and you're forming it into a state. And then you're saying that this is what happened. And
Yeah.
as long as you're doing that, then there's you're filtering everything through a thought. And so the problem then becomes something like trying to remove this middleman thought thing.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not
but
possible.
as much as possible. But when you
No, no,
do that,
it, it's not possible. I don't think so.
no, no. But here's the thing, because this is where this leads. The
Mm.
point is that this is how you get to the idea of nirvana,
Yeah.
because the point to nirvana is that you're not imposing a state on anything. Nothing, when you're in nirvana, there is nothing that can be said, there's nothing that can be communicated, and if there is something that can be said or communicated, then you are not in nirvana. And so so the idea is something like you're trying to come and know and understand yourself. um but
Mhm.
to do that, but to come to know and understand yourself, then to some degree to which you need to have a way to perceive yourself, which is to say that you're creating a structure. But if you're creating a structure, then you're not having true experience, you're having an experience mediated by a thought. And so to truly see oneself is to actually remove all of the structure that is filtering your experience. But by doing so, you now have nothing that can be said. And so this seems to be the nature of the paradox of, like, almost like, to truly know yourself in totality, you have to completely give up an identity. So think of each one of these filters as actually being like a spirit or an identity. You have to give that up to come truly know yourself. But when you do that, you can't actually say anything. And this is kind of like the nature of the game that's being played. It's like trying to look at yourself. It really does feel like you're trying to look in two directions at once. You're trying to look at yourself without looking at
So,
yourself, because
so
once you look at yourself, you're forcing it into an objective state, like you're manifesting it into an object, which,
sure. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, sure, sure. But um, hmm, I mean, I would phrase it slightly differently. The way that I would phrase it is, so think back to this picture where you have the realm, the filter, and then you.
Hmm.
And you say, well, the nature of experience is being mediated by the thought. That's true. But I don't think that you can remove the thought. That's not, I don't think that it's possible for you to do that. So instead of trying to remove the structure or remove the thought, what you do is you merely accept the fact that the thought is the thing that manifests the experience. Then you can let go because you're no longer fighting against the data which the thought uh, translates into you. Instead, you accept that the the immediacy of the experience which you are capable of interfacing with is the thing that is there. That is it.
Yeah, I mean, is this because the thing is I think that there's an idea of the construction and the construction of the essence, the filter in you. I think it's not a proper construction, because I think that there's something like
Yeah,
an
the
essence, huh?
the tension.
What I'm saying. Wait, let me say this. I think that what it is it's something like there is a conscious essence, that exists as a part of just reality. It's just part of reality. And I think that that conscious essence is something that is shared between everybody. And when there is a thought, it's almost like when there is a thought, there is a being that comes into existence associated with that thought. And I think that what it is that when you say you and you're talking about you are actually the filter, and that the action and that the experience independent of the filter is something like a reuniting with the whole. It's like the separation is no longer existence. It's almost like the fact that there is a filter, you can break that into something like a system and environment. There's me, and then there's something else over there. It's like a self and an other, and that self and other is the thing that allows you to identify and say I am. But if you completely remove that, then there's something like a destruction of the self and other perspective, and the only thing left is the whole, or the essence that just is. And I think that that's the whole point to Nirvana. Is to the whole point to Nirvana is to let go of any identification of self, that you can be one and completed with this conscious whole. Um, yeah. So the filter is actually you.
Okay, so when you say the filter is me, do you mean that, so what do you mean it's me? Like, is it my ego? Is it my body? Is it, what do you mean by the filter is me? Because I can't sacrifice myself. I mean, right? Because I mean, you don't want it to go in the direction where the conclusion is, well, I suppose what I need to do is eliminate myself in order to be reunited with the whole, because that has a very obvious interpretation,
That's the conclusion of Buddhism.
is that you must eliminate yourself.
Yes,
Okay,
but
so
not
I
but
would
not
say,
eliminate not eliminate yourself in terms of killing yourself, but eliminate all sense of distinction from all. It's all like there is like
good.
you are
Good,
everything, and
good, good.
every like it's the roots of all ego, all sense of I am.
No, good, good, good. So that's what I mean when I said that you realize. This is exactly what I mean when I say that you realize that there isn't, like, the thought isn't mediating anything. That is the thing. So stop. Like, as soon as you suppose that the thought is carrying something that's on the other side, you've already presupposed a separation. And so as soon as you release the idea that the thought is carrying something beyond it,
Mm.
then the separation between self and other, or ego and other, ceases to be, and the totality of being becomes merely encapsulated in the experience of the thought. Like,
Mm.
in other words, stop thinking that the thought has information and realize it as being an expression of being per se.
I feel like the thought itself, though, it's forcing a state. It's creating, like, if there is a thought.
Only if you go, okay, so it is creating a state, but we shouldn't suppose that nirvana consists in the absence of structure.
I think like, again, from what we've discussed before, I think it is a state where there is no broken symmetry, and it's just
I think that
pure
that's,
symmetry.
so, okay, well, I don't know. I think under this mode of thinking, I actually disagree with that. I think it's much more like it's a singularity, in the sense that,
Yeah, I mean, you remember those images I sent in the Discord where it has
no,
the
no,
the whole.
yeah, I completely understand. Yeah, I
Yeah,
totally understand what you're saying. I think the reason why I say that is because I think that if we take the perspective that you are trying to assert too maybe literally, then the association towards the existence of thought is that the thought ought to not be. In other
So
words, as long as I am thinking, it is the case that I have not achieved nirvana, in
yes.
which case, I have broken the symmetry, in which case I am separated from the Godhead.
So here's the thing. So yes.
No,
So
hold
so
on, hold on,
no,
hold on.
no, you're correct. You're correct in what you're saying. But I
Yes,
just
good. So
wanted.
let me finish the thinking.
Okay.
So, the, but the problem is that the thought will never go away, which means that you are forever and infinitely separated from the Godhead. Or it is the case that the thought is precisely the thing that you need to embrace. And I'm not saying that that means that you should think more. I'm saying that you should ride the thought as though it were a wave instead of believing that it is like a train carrying you to a destination.
No. Here's the difference. The difference is that when you're in the state of nirvana, there is no, and like I've never been there, so I don't know, but just based off of all my studying of Buddhism and my meditation, so I have some, as my experience in meditation, then you can at least know there's a direction. Oh, if I can extrapolate the direction based off where I've been on what this kind of feels like.
Okay.
Um, and the whole point is that there is no you in the case of nirvana. But in the
Yeah.
and so when you said that unless you go to nirvana, you're completely separated from the Godhead, this goes into my Christian perspective, which is something like, in the case of nirvana, there is no broken symmetry. But in the case of Christianity, or if you're in a pure Buddha land, because I think there's a relationship between them, then then what you have is like a coordinate system placed on the symmetry. So now there is because there is a coordinate system, you can have a reference frame, and now you can have a mapping of this symmetry space, and that mapping can either be defiled or the mapping can be pure. And in this sense, when that is the case, then you're something like a local representation of that symmetry, and that local representation is the sense of self, and the purification of yourself, such that you're not this mapping of the symmetry is not filled with delusion, lies, logical inconsistencies, and untruths. um is the degree to which you can take other beings, other selves, who have the capacity to say that I am me and not, that I am here and you're there, and you can stitch together your coordinate system so everyone's making a local representation of the symmetry.
Mhm.
And then through everyone's purified local representations and sincere and honest relationship with each other, you can expand the local representation to other local representations, creating a broader local neighborhood of the symmetry. And this is the way in which you unite with the Godhead, such that every single person doing this is a shard or reflection of God. And so through the relationship with each other, they come to know God and become one with God, and this is the point, because in Christianity, the purpose is a relationship, and in Buddhism, it is to destroy all relationship, because a relationship implies that there's a self and an other to be in a relationship, which means that there's a symmetry breaking, which means you're not in nirvana, which means that there's a perception and a sense of self. And in Christianity, it is to be one with God, in that we are all. It's like and this is the case in which I'm thinking of a symmetry transformation, to where the idea is that you have something like a symmetry, like as a Lie group symmetry, if you will, and then you have something like a singular representation of that thing, and then you do a unitary transformation to generate all the elements of the group. And it is the fact that you have some extra data to say that you have this element versus that element. But without that extra data, when you do those symmetry transformations, you're not actually transforming it. You can't actually tell transformations happening. So I think that's my formulation. So this is like the alternative to Buddhism, where you can have a local pure relationship with the Godhead, as opposed to trying to have um remove all sense of self to be actually one with it. And because if you're one with it, then it's inconceivable. And then this goes back into your paradox. You're trying to study it, so it's like to actually get to like the true essence of oneself in this sense is to remove all the filter, because now you're not bounded by anything, because if otherwise the filter is putting you in a local region. And so once you get rid of the filter, then Yeah, so that's my estimation of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I understand your perspective. Well, I think I do. So it seems to me that essentially your idea is that um, in order for these things to be made coherent with one another, you must view the Buddhist perspective as essentially a claim about the global structure of the manifold,
Yes.
and that the Christian perspective is essentially a claim about the local structure. And the Christian the Christian interpretation then is a guide for you for determining the degree for determining how you must conduct yourself in order to construct a what you call a purified neighborhood around yourself
Yes.
so that you can reconstruct a local expression of the global structure.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I understand. So the um I still I mean I am not Buddhist and I never will be. I, that's just the
A
case.
lot of people have issues with it, man. For sure.
I don't
I
have
get it.
I don't have any issues per se. The thing that I mean, I suppose we would need to speak with a monk in order to really truly understand.
Hmm.
But the notion that there is no thought. Look, I can understand what it means to say there is no thought, but the claim that there is no thought for me is to be understood not as the it's not to be understood as the physiological mechanisms which facilitate that which we call cognition cease to be. Right? That's not what's happening. Uh,
Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me, Ryan?
yes.
Yeah, you paused for a second. You said
Yeah.
physiological mechanisms.
The physiological mechanisms that construct the thing that we call cognition do not cease to be. Otherwise, you've not achieved nirvana, you've merely died. The claim maybe the definition of nirvana is you have to die, in which case fine. But let's
I
suppose
think there's some degree to which it also kind of like becoming Christian and accepting the crucifixion, all that is something like the embrace of death. Yeah, and not being afraid of it, like
no,
incorporating death into oneself.
no, 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 no. You 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 undergo a rebirth where those things in which you sinned, those things which have characterized your life as sin, are things that you seek to transcend.
Yeah.
You don't literally die. I don't mean that your brain ceases to function.
No,
Like
I'm saying
I
I'm what
literally, when you say there is no thought, one of the ways to interpret that is yes, your pulse ceases and your brain stops working, and now
mhm,
you are a lump of clay on the ground.
yeah.
There's no life essence in you,
Hmm.
right? That can't possibly be the case. Otherwise, no one would be striving towards nirvana in the way they are. They would all
Yeah.
go out and buy weapons and just kill themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Which means then, for us to say that there is no thought does not mean that the physiological structures which continue to produce thought cease to function.
Well,
It
that's the thing
means,
is if they don't say it's no thought, they say it's like a realm of neither perception or non-perception. It's like
right.
a full embrace of the paradox. Yeah.
Well, you can only phrase it paradoxically if you think that thought is to function as a vessel or a vehicle for taking you from one point to another. So, in other words, if you think that what thought does is it functions merely as a function, and that what you are is a domain being carried into a codomain by virtue of the thought,
Hmm.
then yes, the way they phrase it is the right way to phrase it. But if you understand that if you can put if you can put function and substance on the same footing, then the fundamental tuity that we have created in order to try and discern or understand reality ceases to be. And then you become united with your thought. Like you don't view yourself as a sequence of states.
Hmm.
You 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 merely are. You merely are.
Hmm.
right? And so then the thought, like, it's very difficult for me to explain, but essentially what I'm picturing is like you become simultaneously the position and the tangent vector at the same time.
Yes, 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 yes.
Like you're not merely a curve on the manifold
Yes,
being transitioned by the parallel transportation. That's not true.
yes,
You
yes.
become united simultaneously as both of these things,
In this,
and then
in what? Yes.
and then notion of broken symmetry ceases to be. But it's not because you don't have direction. It's because uh, it's because that the nature of the experience ceases to be teleological.
Yeah, I think one way that I think about this is a formulation of being at the present. It's in I remember, and it's frustrating because a lot of times over the years I'm having these discussions, and there are certain points where my mind is contemplating different things at different times, and at one point in time this particular set of ideas, as we're at right now with the tangent plane and position versus momentum and all that stuff, was so clear, and I spent like months thinking about it, so I would have had a more coherent way. Now I'm trying to conjure back what I was thinking,
Yeah,
but it does seem to be something like being purely at the present.
yeah,
And one thing that I was listening to Ajahn Brahm, who's a Buddhist monk, he was describing the idea of being in a hot air balloon, and he was saying that people in a hot air balloon, you'd think that it'd be chaotic up there because they're being blown by the wind, but in fact it's quite peaceful because there's no resistance, and so you're just kind of like moving along with the wind. And it's like this idea of being in a co-moving reference frame, and that's the difference between not being in a flow state or resisting reality. Is something like, instead of just letting go and embracing and being on this flowy stream, you're
yeah,
constantly trying to control and move. And this is associated with the idea of the second fundamental truth, which is this idea of well, you have the first one is suffering, the other one is a craving, and the craving is associated with the desire to have things the way you want them to be as opposed to how
exactly.
they are, and that creates friction and
The,
tension.
the teleological nature of being ceases to be. You don't need the shape of the thing or the curve to be going in a particular direction. Like you still have these things, but
Yeah.
you aren't attached to them being in a particular state.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And I think what that does is it's something like your body itself, that's a very unnatural state to be in. Like to actually be able to, basically, it's like, imagine your entire physiological structure is in a state to where it's co-moving with all other phenomena or whatever in your surrounding area. Like everything is like in some sort of co-moving flow state with no resistance. And then because you're in that co-moving flow state, there is no actual past, present, or future. You're just in the present because nothing's moving. It's like
That's right.
nothing's moving because you're co-moving with everything.
That's right. Yeah.
And that I think is the state of nirvana. It's being at the pure presence,
Yeah.
present. The point is that I think this comes back, we can go back to this paradox with this idea of trying to get to the present, and it has to do with the kind of like taking the limit. Think of the difference quotient in calculus, and you're trying to get to this place where delta h is equal to zero. But of course, that will give you the singularity. But if you think about it, is what's happening there is that the ideal representation of the derivative is the point where the distance is so small that you're trying to make them as the same as possible while still being different, because you want it to be close so that the distance is so small that they're the same, but they can't be exactly the same because you'll hit a singularity. So the ideal state is one in which it's the same and not the same, which is a paradox, which is a singularity, which is like in my worldview, in the construction that I've made, at the foundation is the concept of paradox. And when you read that book by C.S. Lewis, he precisely talks about, like, when he's constructing this whole problem, which that we're talking about, which is this pure deterministic point of view of reality, where you have everything's materialistic, and so everything's deterministic, and everything's deterministic, then he points out all the issues you have with that. So he constructs this thing called the natural and super. Oh man, my battery's at 1%. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I just switched to my Wi-Fi. So, because I want to get this point across. So when he's formulating this, when he's trying to get past this, this is the first chapter of his book. It's very good, very well written. I suggest anyone to read it. But he's critiquing this deterministic, materialistic point of view, and to do so, he has to construct a thing called the natural and supernatural, which is to take reality and separate it into something like the materialistic natural versus this supernatural, which is like the domain of God and where there's true sovereignty. So like God is the true sovereign. And so there's like true sovereignty to where God has the capacity to impregnate the state of the physical such that he can divinely interject. And then once he stopped interjecting, the laws of physics evolve the way they should evolve, given this impregnation by God. And one thing that this is the basis for all of his arguments, is to break things up into this natural and supernatural in this way. And he says that part of the reason for doing that is he needs to, for there to be free will, there has to be something like true sovereignty somewhere. And it's funny because like in the next chapter, he's like, there's this new fangled science called quantum mechanics, and I don't really understand it, but they're talking about this idea of uncertainty that may exist. And I don't know if they're talking about subjective uncertainty or like objective uncertainty, but if there was objective uncertainty, then this would be another opportunity for there to be free will and true sovereignty. He's like, but I'm not a quantum physicist, so I can't make that claim. And then he says something like, in the one of the problems with trying to have something other than the natural and supernatural to explain how free will can exist is that you have to construct something that you say is from the natural but also isn't the natural. So something that is of the natural but also is independent of it but comes from it. And he's like, and that is just something that's paradoxical and doesn't make any sense, so I'm not going to go down that path. And I'm reading, and he actually has names for each one of these point of views: the materialist view, this separation between the natural and supernatural, and this paradoxical view. I'm like, that's it, that's the one. And I had already come to that conclusion with everything that I had developed up to that point, that was my position, is that this paradoxical nature of reality, I think, is telling you the degree to which reality is incomplete. It's telling you the degree to which things are not fixed, things are not deterministic, and I think that those are the points where, what I call gauge gates. It's almost like how Eric Weinstein is talking about when you have things that don't line up, then you know that there's something behind the curtain that's going on. It's like the fact that things don't line up is where you can know that there's something else going on, and like they use that to like predict the existence of particles or something like that.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that I think you have these like when you identify these singularities, these this incompleteness, these paradoxical structures, they're telling you that there's something about the incompleteness of the universe which
Oh,
gives the
okay.
capacity for free will. And I think that what it is, it's this is the virtual side. Like in my construction, there's always this idea of, well, what's the physical state of the universe? What's the state of the physical system? Well, you give its degrees of freedom, which are the characteristics of the system, and you give settings of the degrees of freedom. But
Mm.
the problem is that those settings are things that can be measured. Like I can make measurements to know I can make measurements and observations to know what the settings are, and I can make those measurements with a certain level of precision. And so I can get some precision as to what the state of the system is. But my point is I don't think that you can have infinite information stored in infinite energy and matter, because the information has to be stored in energy and matter. And so that infinite information or exactness, the exact state of a system, requires infinite energy and matter. So instead, what you assume is something like a machine precision, beyond which there's only a symmetry of
Oh,
things that are consistent with the physical configuration of energy and matter. And that is the incompleteness, that is the gauge gate, that's the virtual side. And then you have this capacity to do as a being with mind, a being with free will. This symmetry represents entropy, it represents freedom, it represents a lack of constraints. It is in that space in which you can make a transformation, but these transformations are all going to be algebraic, unitary transformation, information preserving transformations, such that as long as there isn't an exchange of the information such that the physical configuration of energy and matter changes, then any transformation that you do with a fixed configuration of the system is going to be a symmetry transformation, a gauge transformation that in isolation can't be observed, but then once you allow the things to interact, the gauge transformation is a change of phase that then affects the resulting outcome. And so I think that this is the space where it can be proposed that free will exists if we see ourselves as these things that exist on the virtual side, which would be your non-physical side that you're talking about. It's this virtual side where
Yeah.
we can do these unitary transformations.
So let me ask you something in the framework that you're trying to build. So I want to ask the question like this, but I don't, this isn't the exact right way to ask it, but I'm going to ask it this way, and then we can try and hash it out in the direction that I'm actually trying to push it in.
Okay.
And the question is something like, do you think that what we are, like as spiritual or numinous beings, it's like, so do you think that the way that we manifest ourselves physically, that aspect of ourselves physically, is in the capacity to, I mean, you don't sit there and think, well, I'm changing the phases. No, but like in some sense, it's like what we are, that which we are, that's in, like, say, the image of God, the way that that thing manifests physically is by like internal symmetry transformations, so that when we go and interact with something else, the interference produces the consequences of the willful transformation of the internal phases. Like,
Something
do you
like
think
that.
that,
Yeah.
you think that's what we are?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I see.
But I think that
Yeah,
it.
so you're right. Good. So you think that physical reality is like the base of the manifold, and then we
Mhm.
live as little fibers over it in some
Yes.
sense. Okay. All right.
And
And then
but at the same time, it's dual because you can't be independent from the base. So the fiber depends on it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, the way that we might phrase that is we would say that the manifold itself can't be globally trivialized, right? Like you can't separate it into a product of two spaces where you have the strictly physical and the strictly spiritual. You
Yes.
can
Yes.
do
Yes.
that.
Yes.
You could do it locally in order to talk about what these transformations mean. But
Yes.
when you try to separate it globally, it becomes absurd to do something like that, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but that's okay.
Absolutely.
So like essentially what you think is that what we're doing is we are reassigning the local value of this section over a particular open neighborhood in the base manifold, and then we'll take that value and then like transport it into a different fiber and then see how they interfere in the base manifold or something like that. And then, like, I don't know, maybe the goal is we're trying to figure out what the global geometry of the total space is or something like.
Yes. Yes. So you have something like that virtual side, which is the where the fibers are,
Yeah,
and
okay. I
the idea is that is the space where you're breaking symmetry and mapping it out,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
trying to map
Yeah.
out that entire space. But that entire space is like the result of a singularity or something like that, and as long as you have a construction that can perceive, then
Mm,
you force yourself into a local
yeah,
neighborhood of that thing.
for sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to think how I would describe this. Yeah, I think because I'm not taking the physical nature of reality as, like, in the context of the conversation we were having earlier, probably the closest analogy I could come up with in the context of this particular model that we're using that's immediately before us is like what I'm proposing is that we substitute the base manifold to something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But again, that like I think that analogy is only very loose because I don't think that analogy um makes it clear the sorts of changes that I'm trying to propose.
Well, that's why I
Uh,
was trying to understand when you were talking about the because you're almost, and correct me if I'm wrong,
mm,
referencing the psychological data to look at it
yes.
purely psychologically as a contrast to looking at it physically, um, and And so that's why I wanted to know, what do you mean by the unphysical, and that's why I presented this structure with the base manifold and the fibers, which is my general setting for which I think, because this virtual
Yeah,
side, the side of symmetry, the side of gauge, is something like the unphysical, but it is
yeah,
still
yeah,
part of the physical, because all the
yeah. So
geometry on the
yeah,
opposite side is dependent on the configuration of energy and
yeah,
matter.
correct. Yeah, um, so if you put me in a corner and you force me to try and give you a sense of what I mean by what I would interpret by physical in the context of the thing that I'm thinking of, it
Yeah.
would probably be something like, well, we're comprised of a bunch of faculties, and one of the faculties that mediates our experience is that which has the capacity to sense things. And I mean it like tactily.
Hmm.
And I would say that all those contents which can present themselves in a primitive way as data sensorially assimilatable by that particular faculty is what I would call physical. So it's like things you can touch, taste, see, smell, and hear.
Hmm.
Is like that naively,
do
right?
you
Like,
do you know in Buddhism that's their construction? There's no, what's it, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. No sight, sound, scent, taste, touch, or thought. No seeing, not even thinking. This is the Heart Sutra. So
yeah,
like part of their construction is like their construction of perception is, I think, one of the most rigorous that exists, and it's because
yeah,
the spiritual religious formulation of Buddhism is actually very academic and philosophical. It's like
yeah,
that time of in reality was
yeah,
basically
yeah.
a marrying between philosophy and spirituality, and so it's
Well,
so insanely rigorously constructed.
I mean, if you go and you read like this is Augustine's sermons.
Hmm.
There I have a couple other ones around here, but if you read, and this is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Catechism of the Catholic
Oh,
Church.
nice.
Um, these like look at how thick this thing is, and look at the size of the text. You know, these things are attempts at absolute systematic exposition of being according to the Catholic faith, right?
Hmm.
And these, I would say that the level of rigor that goes into these sorts of things is on par with exactly what you're talking about in the
Oh, yeah,
context of
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, the
it's
Catholic
very
Church, and yeah, no,
it's
they
it's insanely serious. It's very
yes.
it's crazy.
Well, this is
Um,
actually one reason why I always get frustrated when talking with atheists and other people who criticize religion, is they don't understand the degree to which people were serious and sincere in what they were
eh,
doing.
absolutely.
They truly don't understand how
They think
seriously
they're on
people are taking
collusion.
this.
Just the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you actually like I have, remember I sent you that YouTube video of that YouTube channel Tooth, and he
Oh,
does
yeah.
yeah, he actually sounds like you, that guy. But
Oh,
he, like, not in terms of like the way you speak, but like your
yeah,
actual voice. But
yeah,
he talks about Thomas Aquinas and just kind of the ideas and how they're grappling when he formulates some of their ideas. It's like this stuff is not like children's play. This is like high
yeah. It's not.
scholarship. This is like the
Yeah, it's
height
not
of
trivial
scholarship.
at all. Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not trivial at all. No, people. My understanding is that most people hate trying to read Thomas. I mean, I think Thomas. I'm gonna end up buying his Summa Theologica books eventually one day and reading them,
Hmm.
because I stopped by the library and I was perusing them and I thought that they were very interesting. I just don't have the time to read those things right now. But yeah, I mean, my understanding is that most people have a lot of difficulty with reading, say, Aquinas. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very blessed in this regard. I mean, it seems like a lot of people have a lot of difficulty reading and understanding Carl Jung too, but I could just pick up his books and understand exactly what he means. And I think it's just because the the essence of my intuition and the structure of my personality makes it so that I was already predisposed
Yes.
to looking at the world in that way. And he was just giving me the words to name the nature of the way that I look at the world.
Yeah. Well, I think it actually comes down to something like the size of your cognitive schemata.
Yeah.
And this goes to what I always talk about with the size of your language that you use to resolve concepts and to make
Sure.
perceptions. And the
Yes.
size of that language has to do with this number of disparate experiences you have in disparate languages. And I mean disparate in the sense that you can do two. It actually has to do with that kind of like the idea of linear independence,
Right.
where if you have two vectors that are linearly dependent, then you're not really getting any new information. But then when you allow them when you make them separate it in some way, now they have the capacity to
Yeah.
map an extra dimension. Yeah, and so you can't do a bunch of linearly dependent activities that all look different, but they're all pretty much the exact giving you the exact same data.
Yeah.
And typically, if you do, I mean, and not typically, but if you do things that are disparate, you're going to be doing them from the mental faculties and the language and system of perception that you had prior to
Yep.
gaining the new language and experience, which means that those things are stitched together at
Yeah.
that
Right.
at that point. And so you're
Yeah.
literally taking you're unfurling, you're doing an
Yeah.
unfurling, which
Yeah.
increases the dimension that you think in. So
Yeah.
then when you're given
Yeah.
someone like Carl Jung, assuming that the experiences you've had and the languages you've learned are true, sincere languages that have actual logically sound structure, and you've actually connected them
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
coherently, then when
Yeah.
you're given another person who's thinking at this deeper meta level with their large cognitive schemata, you can immediately start to map it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and this is what I mean when people don't understand, when they're reading when people are mocking the Bible. It's like you are almost walking up to someone and admitting that you have no that you're shallow. Like you're almost
Yeah.
you're almost walking up and admitting that you have no capacity to comprehend what's in this thing. And like I hear Bill Maher talk about it all the time, like he's always laughing
Yeah.
about it. It's like you might as well just get in front of everyone and tell them that you don't know how to read. It's absurd. And like like to me, I think taking the Bible and just laughing at it as
Absolutely.
being stupid nonsense is equivalent to someone giving you entire works of Shakespeare and you're like, this is stupid. This is dumb. You're revealing something about yourself that is
He
not
probably
good.
did say that, right? Like you can imagine Bill at 17. All right, we're gonna read
This is
every
stupid.
case, and why do I need to know shit about Tao? Like,
Yeah. So I
yeah,
know that
stupid.
I know this will
Stupid.
probably trigger a lot of people, but that was my experience with the Bible. I was raised Christian. I was an atheist for a good period of time,
Mm,
and while I was an atheist, I told myself, or I actually did, start worshiping science, reason, and logic and truth.
yeah,
And these were the
yeah,
things that I worshipped, and nothing was more important. If any time anything threatened these ideals, I would sacrifice that part of myself without even a second thought. Anything that didn't align with them was worthy of being purged.
yeah,
And so getting my PhD in physics brings you in relationship with the spirit of truth as it has been manifested through the works of physics and mathematics. So
yeah,
then when I come across this Bible and I start reading it again, or I start reading it for the first time actually, and I start looking at it, and it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of really true things in here that I'd be an idiot to reject. And then as
yeah,
I use this cognitive schemata I've developed to analyze and break it down, I'm thinking to myself, this thing is insanely deep. Like, what is going on here? And it's so mind blowing that I start thinking, like, where did this thing come from? Like, and then you actually start considering, is this really divinely? Like, where did this come from? This thing is insanely deep,
yeah,
and I think that and that's part of one of my goals is like I think that through my relationship with Christianity, I'm taking this cognitive schemata, which is my physical, math, rational self that I've developed, and I'm
yeah,
stitching that world together. But then when I went and studied Buddhism, it's like, wow, Buddhism is insanely deep. What is this? And then they're being connected, and like the mediator, the thing that allows me to map between them is this mathematical thing that I've constructed, which is the point to the podcast. Like I'm trying to communicate this soul, this spirit that I've developed over time.
yeah,
And my hyper focus on this meta level zero data or the things that are obvious is because I want to build a bridge such that the things I'm saying are so obviously true that you
yeah,
to reject them would to
yeah,
reveal yourself as
yeah,
being dishonest or delusional or shallow or something's wrong with you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Do you think so? Maybe this is a good place to pause so that we can actually start the.
The actual, I mean, this will probably get uploaded. This is actually pretty good.